Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Many people know about the European Union, or EU. It is a large group of countries in Europe that work closely together. But there is a puzzle. 3 rich European countries are not part of the EU. These countries are Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland. They are known for being wealthy and having good lives for their citizens. These 3 countries are very close to the EU in many ways, even if they are not members. For example, many people from Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland work and live in EU countries. Also, goods like Swiss watches, Norwegian oil, and Icelandic fish are sold easily across EU borders. People can travel without passports between these countries and many EU countries, making daily life feel very connected. They share many European values and have strong economies linked to the EU's large market. However, Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland have made a clear choice to stay politically separate. They want to keep their full independence. This means they want to make all their own laws and decisions. They do not want to be full members of the EU, which would mean following many EU rules and sharing political power. This wish for independence is very strong for their people. This story will look closely at how these 3 nations have built their special way of living with Europe. We will learn about their unique histories and the reasons for their choices. We will see how they get many benefits from working with the EU while still keeping their political freedom. But there is a big question for the future. The world is changing quickly. There are new problems like climate change and global disagreements. Can Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland continue their special way of life? Will their choice to be independent still work well in a world that asks for more cooperation and shared decisions? This book will explore if their unique path can last. 2. A different start. After World War II, many European countries wanted lasting peace. They believed that working together closely could prevent more wars. In 1957, 6 countries, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg signed a treaty. This created the European Economic Community, or EEC. The EEC's goal was not just to help trade. It also had big political aims, like bringing nations closer to a political union. Its founders wanted to make war impossible between its members. However, not all European countries wanted this deep political unity. Some preferred to focus only on trade. So, in 1960, a different group formed the European Free Trade Association, known as EFTA. 7 nations, including the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Norway, signed this agreement. EFTA offered a simpler idea. Countries would remove trade barriers among themselves, but each country would keep its own trade rules with other nations. It was about trade without political integration. A very important change happened in the early 1960s. The United Kingdom, a large EFTA member, saw that the EEC was growing fast and becoming very rich. In 1961, the British government decided to apply for EEC membership. This move surprised many countries in EFTA. If Britain joined the EEC, EFTA would lose its biggest economy. Other EFTA nations, like Norway and Denmark, also started to think about joining the EEC. But then the path to membership was blocked. France's president, Charles de Gaulle, did not want Britain to join. He believed Britain was too close to the United States and not fully ready for European unity. In 1963, he said his famous word, non, stopping Britain's application. He said non again in 1967. These actions stopped not only Britain, but also countries like Norway and Denmark, which had applied with Britain, from joining the EEC. Their plans were put on hold for many years. This period in the 1960s was a time of waiting for many countries. The EEC continued to grow stronger and more united. EFTA remained a looser group of countries, unsure about their future. The delays gave some EFTA nations more reasons to doubt the idea of full European integration. They started to prefer their own path. Finally, in 1969, President de Gaulle left office, and the door to EEC enlargement opened again. In 1973, the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Ireland officially joined the EEC. This further changed the map of European cooperation. EFTA became smaller, but its remaining members, like Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland, became stronger in their belief that they could thrive without full political union. 3. Norway's choice. Norway has tried to join the European Union, or its earlier form, 2 times. Both times, its people said no. These decisions show how much Norwegians value being independent. The first time Norway wanted to join was in the early 1970s. This started a big discussion across the country. The first vote, called a referendum, happened on September 25, 1972. It was a very important moment for Norway. People living in cities often wanted to join, thinking it would help Norway's economy. But people in rural areas, especially those near the sea, were against it. They had 3 main reasons for saying no. First, they valued their sovereignty. Norway had only become fully independent from Sweden in 1905. It also remembered being occupied in World War II. Norwegians wanted to keep control of their own country and not give power to others. Second, fishing was very important. It was not just a job, it was part of Norway's national identity. The European Economic Community's new rules for fishing worried many. They feared that other countries would get access to Norway's rich fishing waters. This would harm their way of life. Third, the country had recently found a lot of oil in the North Sea. In 1972, people were just starting to see how much money this oil could bring. Many thought Norway could be rich on its own, without joining the community. The vote ended with a clear no. 53.5% of people voted against joining. 46.5% voted for it. After this, Norway did not join. The country continued its own path for many years. Then, in the early 1990s, Europe changed again. The European Community was becoming the European Union with more power. Norway had another chance to join. By this time, the oil from the North Sea made Norway one of the wealthiest countries in the world. This wealth played a big part in the second vote. The second referendum was in November 1994. Like the first one, it was a close vote and divided the country. The No campaign argued that Norway did not need the European Union. They said that Norway's oil money gave the country everything it needed and more. Why share control of such a great resource with other nations? The fishing industry still strongly opposed membership. They worried about the European Union's fishing rules just as they had in 1972. The idea of sovereignty was also important. Many Norwegians felt that joining would mean losing too much control over their own laws and decisions. Again, the no side won. 52.2% voted against joining, and 47.8% voted for it. After 2 referendums, Norway chose to stay outside the European Union. However, Norway still wanted to be close to Europe's economy. So, in 1994, Norway became a founding member of the European Economic Area, known as the EEA. This EEA agreement allows Norway to be part of the European Union's single market. This means goods, services, money, and people can move freely between Norway and European Union countries. But Norway does not have to join the European Union's customs union, its farming or fishing policies, or its political institutions. It can keep its own special way of life while still trading with its European neighbors. 4. Iceland's story. Iceland is a young country in Europe. It became free from Denmark in 1944. This short history made people really value their independence. For Iceland, the sea is very important. Fishing is not just a job, it is a big part of the country's life. About 40% of everything Iceland sells to other countries comes from fish. The sea is like its main road and its way to live. Because fishing is so vital, Iceland fought hard to control its waters. These fights were called the Cod Wars. They happened in the 1950s and 1970s. Iceland fought with the United Kingdom over who could fish in the waters around Iceland. Iceland wanted to control fishing up to 200 miles from its coast. These wars were not only about fish. They were about Iceland's survival as an independent nation. Iceland won these fights. This made it very clear that Iceland would never give up control of its fishing grounds. For many years, Iceland did not think about joining the European Union. The main reason was the EU's common fisheries policy. This policy shares fishing waters among all EU countries. Icelanders saw this as a threat to their control over their most important resource. But things changed in 2008. There was a big money crisis around the world. Iceland's banks failed. The country's money, the krona, lost much of its value. Many Icelanders then thought that joining the EU might be a good idea. They hoped that using the euro, the EU's money, would make their economy more stable. So, in 2009, a new government decided to ask to join the EU. Talks to join the EU started in 2010. Iceland was already quite close to EU rules because of another agreement called the European Economic Area, EEA. But three big issues were very hard to agree on. The first was fishing. The EU still wanted Iceland to share its fish with other EU countries, but Iceland refused. The second issue was farming. Iceland has small farms, and they have many rules and help from the government. Joining the EU would mean big changes for them. The third issue was whaling. Iceland allows whaling, but the EU does not. This was also a difficult point. As the economy got better, people in Iceland started to think differently again. The immediate problems from the money crisis were over. People saw that joining the EU would mean making big compromises, especially about fishing. In 2013, a new government came to power that did not want to join the EU. They stopped the talks. Then, in 2015, Iceland officially said it would not join the EU. Today, Iceland works closely with the EU through the EAA agreement. This means it can trade easily with EU countries. But Iceland keeps control over its fishing, farming, and whaling. However, the idea of joining the EU has come up again. After elections in November 2024, a new government came to power. This government wants to ask the people in Iceland if they want to start talks to join the EU again. They plan to hold this vote by 2027. Some people in Iceland are now more interested in joining the EU for new reasons. They worry about safety in Europe, especially after the war in Ukraine. Also, the United States, under President Donald Trump, has sometimes been unpredictable. This makes some Icelanders think about being closer to Europe for security. Others still hope for a more stable economy by using the euro. But the fishing industry still does not want to join, as it fears losing control of its waters. The future of Iceland's relationship with the EU is still an open question, and the people will have to decide again. 5. The Swiss way. Switzerland has a very old and special way of acting in the world. This is called neutrality. It means Switzerland does not take sides in wars or fights between countries. This tradition started many centuries ago and became an official rule in 1815. For Swiss people, being neutral is a very important part of who they are. They see their country as a place of peace and a helper in global talks. This special role makes them different from many other European nations. Switzerland also has a unique system of government called direct democracy. In this system, citizens vote on many laws directly. They can propose new laws or ask for changes to old ones. They vote often during the year on different topics. This gives people a very strong say in how their country is run. They value this direct control over their government and their laws. It is a core belief that decisions should come from the people, not just from elected leaders. In 1992, Swiss people faced a big decision. They had to vote on whether to join the European Economic Area, known as the EEA. The EEA would have given Switzerland access to Europe's single market, meaning goods, services, money, and people could move freely. The Swiss government wanted to join. However, many citizens were worried. They thought that joining the EEA might make their country lose its special neutrality. They also feared that it would weaken their direct democracy, as Switzerland would have to follow many laws made by the EU without having a direct vote in them. The vote was very close, but in the end, the Swiss people voted no. 50.3% voted against joining, and 49.7% voted for it. This showed how deeply divided the country on the issue. Because Switzerland did not join the EEA, it needed another way to work with its European neighbors. So, Switzerland chose a different path. It started to make many separate agreements with the European Union. These are called bilateral agreements, meaning agreements between two sides. Over many years, Switzerland and the EU have created more than 100 separate agreements. These cover many different areas, like trade, how people can move between countries, transport, and scientific research. This way, Switzerland gets many of the economic benefits of being close to the EU without having to join fully. This unique Swiss way of having many bilateral agreements has brought both good things and challenges. On the positive side, it has made Switzerland a very rich and successful country. Swiss businesses can sell their products easily across Europe, and Swiss people can live and work in EU countries. This close economic link has helped Switzerland's economy grow strong. However, there are also difficulties. Switzerland still needs to follow many EU rules to keep these agreements working, but it does not have a vote when these rules are made. This means Switzerland is often a rule taker, but not a rule maker. For a country that values direct democracy so much, this can be a hard balance to keep. Still, this special path has allowed Switzerland to keep its independence and neutrality while staying connected to its European partners. Living with the EU. Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland are not part of the European Union, but they live and work very closely with it every day. They have found special ways to get many benefits from being close to the EU without becoming full members. Each country has its own way, but they all share similar good points and challenges. Let's start with Norway and Iceland. These two countries are part of the European Economic Area, or EAA. This important agreement began in 1994. The EAA lets Norway and Iceland join the EU's single market. This means that goods, services, money, and people can move freely between these countries and all EU member states. For example, a Norwegian company can easily sell its products across Europe, and an Icelandic person can live and work in an EU country. This free movement helps their economies grow strong and makes life easier for their citizens. It brings a lot of wealth to both nations. However, being in the EAA comes with a main rule. Norway and Iceland must accept and follow many of the EU's laws and rules, especially those about the single market. They do not get to help create these laws in the same way EU members do. When the EU makes a new rule, for example, about how products are made, Norway and Iceland usually have to adopt it. They can share their ideas, but they do not have a vote on the final decision. If they do not follow these rules, they risk losing their access to the important European market. Switzerland's relationship with the EU is different. Instead of one big agreement like the EAA, Switzerland has made many separate agreements with the EU. There are over 100 of these agreements, called bilateral agreements. These deals cover different areas like trade, travel, and research. This allows Switzerland to work with the EU on specific topics. But in the areas covered by these agreements, Switzerland still needs to change its own laws to match the EU's rules. This way of working has helped Switzerland have a strong economy and be a very important trading partner for the EU. One important area where all three countries work very closely with the EU is the Schengen area. Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland are all members of this special zone. Being in Schengen means people can travel between these countries and most of the EU without showing their passports at borders. This makes travel much easier for everyone. It also helps businesses and makes daily life simpler for people who live near borders. It shows that these countries can agree to EU policies when they match their own needs and values. But for all three, the main challenge is always the same. They follow many EU rules, but they cannot vote on how these rules are made. They are often called rule takers instead of rule makers. They cannot vote in the European Parliament, and they do not have a seat in the Council of Ministers where big decisions are made. They can give their opinions during discussions, but they do not have a formal vote to say yes or no to new laws. This is sometimes called a democratic deficit. It means that laws created by EU members directly affect Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland, but their citizens do not get to vote for the people who make those laws or directly on the laws themselves. It's like getting rules by fax democracy, meaning the laws just arrive from Brussels. This can be a difficult situation. For example, a country might have to accept new EU rules on environmental protection or banking that its own people might not fully support. But these countries keep full control over big national decisions like foreign policy and defense. They still have to follow many rules made by others. This careful balance between being close to the EU for economic benefits and keeping national control is how Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland live with the EU today. 7. New problems for Europe. The way Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland work with the European Union has been quite stable for many years. But recently, new big problems have appeared. These problems are making everyone think again about Europe's future. One big change came from Brexit. This was when the United Kingdom left the EU. Brexit showed how difficult it can be for a country to leave the European Union. It created many talks and disagreements. For some, Brexit made Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland's ways of working with the EU seem better, as their systems were not so messy. These countries had found ways to get many benefits from the EU without being full members. Their special agreements had worked well for a long time. However, Brexit also changed how the EU sees countries that are not members. The EU now wants simpler and clearer rules for these relationships. The EU might be less open to very special, different agreements in the future. It wants more predictable ways for non-member countries to work with it. Then came the war in Ukraine. This war brought very serious new problems for Europe. It pushed countries to think more about safety and defense. For Switzerland, the war tested its old rule of neutrality. Switzerland has been neutral for hundreds of years. This means it usually does not take sides in wars. But because of the war in Ukraine, Switzerland decided to join the EU in putting sanctions, or punishments, on Russia. This was a very big step and made many people in Switzerland discuss what neutrality means today. Some people think it is harder for Switzerland to stay truly neutral in a world with big conflicts. Norway and Iceland are both part of NATO, a group for defense. So the war in Ukraine affected them differently. Norway sells a lot of oil and gas to Europe. This made Norway very important for Europe's energy. Iceland worried more about its own safety and defense. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his ideas about NATO made some people in Iceland question if they could always count on America for help. The war also made EU countries work even more closely on defense and energy. This could mean countries outside the EU are left behind in these new efforts. These new problems are slowly changing what people think in Norway and Iceland. In Norway, fewer people are now against joining the EU. Support for joining has grown, reaching levels not seen for a long time. It still means most people are against joining, but the number is getting smaller. In Iceland, there is also a new way of thinking. The government that took power in November 2024 has promised to ask people if they want to start talks to join the EU again. This shows how much things are changing. Younger people in both countries often support closer ties with the EU. They have grown up with the EU and see the benefits of working together. Other big global problems also push for more cooperation. Climate change is one of them. Switzerland's mountains are changing because of warmer weather. This needs all countries to work together on things like water management. Norway, even though it sells oil, also feels the effects of climate change. Iceland's economy depends a lot on industries that use a lot of energy, and they might need to follow new EU rules about climate. Also, new technologies like digital communication and artificial intelligence need common rules across Europe. These challenges make it clear that countries need to cooperate more and more. It is harder for small countries to deal with these big problems alone. Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland show that countries can be rich and connected to Europe without joining the European Union. These nations keep their own rules and traditions, like Norway's fishing rights or Switzerland's neutrality, which their people value. They have strong economies, and their citizens often decide many things directly. This path offers many benefits, but there are also challenges. These countries must follow many EU rules for trade and travel, but they do not help make these rules. They are rule takers, not rule makers. Big global changes, like the war in Ukraine, make their way harder. Brexit also showed that being outside the EU can have many difficulties. Still, these three nations offer a different way for working with Europe. They prove that Europe can cooperate in many ways. Their journeys show countries can keep their identity and choices while staying close to neighbors. The future will show if their special path can continue in a changing world. What do you think? Can other countries successfully follow this path, or is full EU membership the only long-term answer for Europe?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.